Hello, and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 1st Edition. Today's video is the second in the Merry Little Sinmas, my sequel series to last year's 12 Days of Sinmas. And if you don't know what that means, I suggest checking out the playlist in the description. Basically, over a 7-week period, I'm covering the story of the Runelords of Thassilon in the Age of Lost Omens, preparing players and GMs for Revenge of the Runelords. Today's video is something new for my channel, a summary of the events of an AP, in this case, the legendary Rise of the Runelords. My goal here is to get you and your game group caught up on the lore of Thassilon and Varisia, so you can jump right in to the new Revenge of the Runelords mythic adventure path. I said this in the introduction to this series, but these videos aren't intended to examine every possible nook and cranny in these APs, merely to cover the important events, major players, and prominent locations explored within. If your group has the time and interest, I definitely suggest playing through the whole Runelords series, but I recognize that isn't even remotely feasible for most groups. So, for those of you with better things to do with your time, or who simply need a little lore refresh, I put together this summary. Before that though, if you enjoy this video and want to hear more Pathfinder lore, consider subscribing, or commenting below. Or, if you want to support my channel directly, check out my Patreon. Just $2 a month gets you access to all my scripts as well as the audio files for all of my videos, all of which drop at least a week early. Let me begin with something which should be obvious. Spoiler alert. This video actively spoils the entirety of the Rise of the Runelords adventure path. I will discuss all the major plot points in the campaign, including the final boss fight and the immediate fallout of the campaign. Do not watch this video if you intend to play in the campaign. Additionally, this video, and all the others in this series, assumes you've seen my 12 Days of Sinmas series. I will be assuming a basic knowledge of the material covered in those videos, mainly to avoid having to retread ground I've covered before. Alright, with that out of the way, let's dig in. Backstory and Prelude. Rise of the Runelords is a classic 1E 6-part adventure path, which takes characters from 1st level to 18th level. Rise tells a story which covers a wide array of genres and locations in Varisia. It goes from a small-town celebration, to a murder mystery, to a big-city conspiracy, then to wilderness exploration, dungeon crawling, and the exploration of a lost city. This campaign has a little bit of everything, and it's no wonder that it is broadly loved by fans. Also, just to make things perfectly clear, I'm using the Anniversary edition of the campaign as my lore bible for this video. It has a few minor additions that the original printing didn't include. The first notable events relating to the Runelords in the Age of Lost Omens occurred in 4702 AR. These events kicked off on the Storval Plateau, with the life and suffering of a stone giant named Makmurian. Makmurian was a runt among his fellow stone giants, and was born with a physical ailment, which the giants of his tribe interpreted as an indicator of his sorcerous potential. Makmurian, however, showed no sorcerous talent, and, in desperation for the power he thought was rightfully his, he sought out the forbidden teachings of the ancient masters who once ruled over his people, a group of archwizards who the stone giants remembered only vaguely from their ancestral histories. When his dabbling in these secrets was discovered, Makmurian was exiled from his tribe. Determined to claim the power that he had tasted in his studies, Makmurian set out for the seat of power of the ancient masters, and made his way toward the fabled lost city of Xin-Shalast. The details of his journey are unclear, but he eventually arrived at his destination. Making his way past the various dangers in the abandoned Thassilonian city, Makmurian finally reached the Pinnacle of Avarice, the palace which once housed the Runelord of Greed. The stone giant entered the palace and explored the ruins, until eventually stumbling upon Karzug's anima focus, the link to his personal demiplane, the Eye of Avarice. Not knowing the nature of what he'd discovered, Makmurian accidentally activated the Rune Well of Greed, finally waking Karzug from his 10,000-year stasis. But the Runelord was not yet powerful enough to emerge from the Eye of Avarice, which kept him suspended mostly outside of time. Instead, he used what little influence he could muster on the material plane to ensnare Makmurian and turn the stone giant into his servant. Acting through Makmurian, Karzug set himself to the task of rebuilding his armies and preparing for his re-emergence into the world. He began by collecting servants from the population of monsters in Xin-Shalast, most importantly a group of Lamias, including several matriarchs and a harridan named Sioptra, who would serve as the steward of the Pinnacle of Avarice. Makmurian even managed to begin the process of awakening Karzug's rune giants and his mightiest apprentice, Kalib. These servants would continue to build up the Runelord's forces, even as Makmurian was sent into the world to further prepare the way for his new master. And sent out he was. Makmurian was gifted with tremendous arcane power by his new master, eventually becoming an 11th level wizard. The stone giant was sent back to his tribe in the Valley of the Black Tower, where he set himself up as a tyrant with the aid of several Lamias. Makmurian dominated his fellow giants and took control of over a dozen tribes of stone and hill giants, among others. Even a few mighty taiga giants began to heed his call. He ruled his subjects from Jorgenfist, an ancient fortress with connections to the masters of old, though he never revealed just how much he knew of the fortress's historical importance to his followers. Beyond Makmurian, Karzug sent several agents out into the world to aid in the rituals which would allow him to return to full power. Two of these figures were the Lamia matriarch sisters, Zanesha and Lucretia. These two traveled into Lower Varissia and set to the long, slow work of performing the Sihedron ritual. This ritual was the magical ceremony which would release Karzug back onto the material plane. It required the collection of souls corrupted by greed, which would be fed to the rune well, allowing it to open the portal to the Eye of Avarice. These souls would be collected by an artifact called the Soul Lens, which required the souls to be released from their mortal bodies. To this end, Zanesha and Lucretia set to work cultivating the proper souls by locating susceptible individuals and encouraging greedy behavior on their part. These targets needed to be marked with the Sihedron rune, at which point they were sufficiently prepared. Once they had gathered enough subjects, Zanesha and Lucretia simply needed some means of sacrificing their victims in large quantities. The process of cultivation and sacrifice would take months to plan, and further months to execute, meaning they wouldn't come to fruition until around 4707 AR. But now, we need to rewind a bit, and go back to the moment Makmurian first activated the rune well. Recall from our discussion of rune wells in the Sorshin video last year that all the rune wells were based upon the same design, and were therefore connected by the same esoteric magics which not even all the Runelords fully understood. When Makmurian activated the rune well of greed, he unknowingly sent out a burst of ancient magical energy, which surged through the rune well networks which the Runelords had established throughout ancient Thassilon. This included not only the greater rune wells, which connected to the various temporally locked demiplanes which housed the Runelords of Lust, Pride, and Wrath, but also to the minor rune wells, which all the Runelords had used to create their sin spawn. These lesser devices had been scattered throughout ancient Thassilon to sustain small armies of sin spawn away from population centers. And so, with this sudden activation, surges of strange magic popped up all across Varissia. And this was the unfortunate cause of a string of tragedies to hit the sleepy seaside town of Sandpoint on Varissia's lost coast in 4702 AR. Sandpoint was built near an ancient and crumbling stone tower, which was locally known as the Old Light. This was once, in truth, one of Runelord Alasnist's infamous Hellstorm flumes, located on the border of Bakrakhan and Shalast. The Old Light sat atop an ancient complex known as the Catacombs of Wrath, which housed a lesser runewell of Wrath. With the surge of sin magic from the runewell, a blast of arcane energy in the form of wrathful emotion swept through Sandpoint. Most of the citizens felt nothing but a flash of sudden anger, which passed quickly. But a select few, those whose minds were ready to accept the sin of wrath with open arms, felt a simmering rage take root. One of these individuals was Longiku Kaijitsu, father of Ameko Kaijitsu, who discovered the amorous affairs of his wife and found himself overcome with rage. He confronted his wife and murdered her in a fit of uncontrolled wrath, then sought to cover up the death and make it look like a suicide. Another notable victim of the rune well was Jervis Stute, a relatively harmless man who had a habit of carving beautiful birds into random pieces of wood, which he found around the city. Stute claimed that he saw the birds trapped in the wood, and that he was simply releasing them into the world by carving them, and his carvings were considered a treasured curiosity by the locals. Unbeknownst to most, Stute harbored a secret. Sometime in the past, he had stumbled upon an ancient and mysterious relic, a statue depicting an avian humanoid with the head and wings of a bird. Stute discovered that he felt more inspiration when he carried the trinket with him, and that he could more easily see the birds which he needed to free, causing him to be a better and more prolific artist. He even felt a calling to travel to an island just off the coast of town and build a house there, so he might be closer to the birds who nested there. Unfortunately for Stute, and for the people of Sandpoint, the stone figure which the artist held so dear was actually an ancient statuette of the demon lord Pazuzu, which had been left in the region millennia ago by a long-forgotten cult. This artifact poisoned Stute's thoughts and led him to the island off the coast, where he eventually discovered an ancient and remarkably well-preserved temple to the king of the wind demons. There he devoted himself to obsessing over his new god, and so, when the surge of sin magic passed through him in 4702, Stute proved remarkably susceptible, and the sin of wrath took root in his heart. Stute became the Chopper, a notorious and prolific serial killer who murdered 25 residents of Sandpoint in a matter of months, before finally being brought to justice. The people of Sandpoint at first refused to believe that their beloved local artist could be responsible for the horrors of the Chopper, but the evidence, in the form of grisly trophies throughout his home, was incontrovertible. Finally, only a few months after the death of the Chopper, the final victim of the Rune Well of Wrath struck. Sandpoint was well known for its surprisingly beautiful chapel, which was maintained for years by its head priest, Father Ezekiah Tobin. And though he was unmarried, he had an adopted daughter, a foundling named Nualia, whom he raised as his own. Nualia was born as an Empyrean, a Nephilim of celestial heritage, who would have been called an Azamar pre-remaster. Nualia grew up in an incredibly strict household, with Father Tobin raising her with a firm and overly protective hand. On top of that, she was viewed as a religious figure in the backwater town of Sandpoint. Many of the villagers had never seen a Nephilim before, and the naive townsfolk considered her to be blessed by the gods. They treated her less like a person and more like a walking blessing, placing exceptional pressure on her to be perfect at all times. This left Nualia with a childhood filled with loneliness and isolation. Even her father was a distant figure in her life. So, when a young man named Delek Viscanta showed her some affection in her teen years, she understandably threw herself into his arms. Nualia soon became pregnant with Delek's child, a fact which horrified her father. Delek himself was no better, rejecting Nualia outright and abandoning her to raise their child on her own. Father Tobin responded to this situation with firm cruelty, locking his daughter within the church so she might beg for forgiveness. Finally, after all this tragedy, Nualia miscarried and lost the child who had grown malformed in her womb. Confronted by hurt after hurt, Nualia found herself in a position of incredible vulnerability. And this was the moment that the Rune Well of Wrath flared to life. Nualia found herself infused with anger and hate to an extent she had never experienced before. Overcome with pain, she lashed out, setting fire to the chapel and burning her father alive. The blaze consumed the chapel quickly and soon consumed the neighboring buildings before the citizens of Sandpoint could get the flames under control. In the fire, Nualia disappeared, and she was presumed dead by the townsfolk. These events, the Chopper murders and the Sandpoint fire, came to be known as the Late Unpleasantness, and haunted the memories of the people of Sandpoint for years. And below the town, the Rune Well of Wrath remained active. Book 1, Burnt Offerings. 5 years later, in 4707 AR, during Sandpoint's annual Swallowtail Festival, the echoes of the late unpleasantness returned. A tribe of goblins initiated a raid on the town, one of the largest in the settlement's history. This raid might have been devastating were it not for the involvement of several local heroes. These were the PCs of the Rise of the Runelords adventure path, who we will be calling the Sandpoint Heroes for convenience and clarity. The Sandpoint heroes investigated the raid and discovered that Tsuto Kaijitsu, the Ayuvaran half-brother of Ameko Kaijitsu and the bastard son of Longiku, was collaborating with Nualia to destroy the town. During this investigation, the Sandpoint heroes explored a series of smuggling tunnels beneath the town. These connected to a hidden ancient subterranean structure beneath the remnants of the Old Light. These caverns, called the Catacombs of Wrath, dated back to ancient Thassilon, and within, the heroes faced off against bizarre creatures, things they wouldn't identify until later as Sin Spawn. Exploring further, the heroes defeated a Quasit demon named Irelium, who used an ancient artifact, a minor rune well of wrath, to create Sin Spawn servants. The heroes defeated Irelium only after she had drained the magic from the rune well, but they failed to realize that Irelium was actually a mentor to Nualia, and guided the young Nephilim through the early stages of her faith in Lamashtu. Irelium, however, wasn't just buried in the catacombs alone. She was, in fact, a familiar to a much more powerful entity, one which would remain hidden and undiscovered beneath Sandpoint until much later in the story. Finally moving against Nualia and her forces, the heroes tracked the goblin raiders to the island of Thistletop, which was itself the remains of an ancient sentinel statue, which Karzug had built to watch his border with Bakrakhan. Attacking the makeshift fortress, the heroes defeated the goblins and their chieftain, Ripnugget, before confronting Nualia in the ancient structure's depths. There, they learned the depravity of her plan. Nualia had faked her death during the Sandpoint fire and had escaped into the Varisian countryside. She devoted herself to the worship of Lamashtu, the mother of monsters, and sought to birth all manner of unholy horrors to unleash upon the town. Nualia sought to sacrifice Sandpoint to Lamashtu, so she might achieve her revenge, namely by releasing a monstrous Barghest called Malfeshnikor from within the deepest chambers of Thistletop. The heroes finally defeated Nualia, overcoming her Yeathhound guardians. They then returned to the town, where Nualia's corpse was eventually laid to rest. Book 2. The Skinsaw Murders. Unfortunately, the trouble in Sandpoint was not yet done. A string of murders soon hit the town, with a half-dozen or so victims all marked with a strange symbol, a 7-pointed star. At the same time, an outbreak of ghoul fever hit the outlying farms around Sandpoint, causing all manner of confusion and fear. The Sandpoint heroes eventually tracked the source of both the killings and the disease to Aldern Foxglove, a local noble who had fallen upon hard times due to the influence of others, and his own arrogance and jealousy. The heroes confronted and defeated Aldern, who was infused with strange necromantic magic, but discovered further signs of influence upon him. He was indebted to a group called the Brotherhood of the Seven, based out of Magnamar. Beyond this, the 7-pointed stars couldn't be reliably attributed to Aldern or any of the strange magics he was involved in. Compelled by these mysteries, the Sandpoint heroes traveled to Magnamar and discovered the true nature of the Brotherhood of the Seven. This brotherhood was actually a cult devoted to the worship of Father Skinsaw, the murder aspect of Norgorber. They'd been operating in secret within Magnamar for years, and had recently made plans to assassinate the mayor of the city. At the head of this cult was a woman known as Zanesha. Zanesha was extremely powerful, and even held influence over several faceless stalkers, impersonating Aldern and his partner in their Magnamar home. After much investigating, the Sandpoint heroes traced Zanesha to an old tower in the lower district of Magnamar called the Shadow Clock. Though the Sandpoint heroes eventually discovered Zanesha's true nature as a Lamia and defeated her, they never discovered her true allegiance to the long-forgotten Runelord Karzug. They did discover a further hint, however, in the form of a note from Zanesha's sister, Lucretia. Book 3. The Hook Mountain Massacre. The Sandpoint heroes traced Lucretia's note to the backwoods town of Turtleback Ferry, located near an ancient dam called Skull's Crossing in central Varissia, beneath the peak of Hook Mountain. The heroes discovered the town, which was experiencing severe unseasonable rains, had recently become home to a gambling barge called the Paradise, which had unfortunately sank a few weeks back. This club was exceedingly popular, and the patrons could only gain access by getting a simple tattoo in the shape of a 7-pointed star. The club's owner was a woman called Lucretia, though she was not present at the time of the heroes' arrival in town. The Paradise was a popular destination in such a sleepy little town, and many of the citizens and the denizens of the nearby woodlands had accepted the tattoo so they might gain entry. Unbeknownst to all, including the heroes, with these tattoos, the people of Turtleback Ferry were adequately prepared for sacrifice to the Sihedron ritual. When the Paradise sank, nearly 24 such souls were lost beneath the waves. Unsure of what to do in Lucretia's absence, the Sandpoint heroes also learned of a mysterious loss of communication with the Black Arrows, an organization of warriors stationed out of the nearby Fort Rannoch. The Black Arrows had been founded to cull the ogre and troll activity in the region, and they had, until very recently, maintained close communications with the town. This silence was not a coincidence, and was instead the result of careful planning on the part of one Barl Breakbones. Barl was a lieutenant to Mokmurian, and was tasked with bringing to heel the Krieg ogres of Hook Mountain, and assimilating them into Mokmurian's armies. As Barl set the Krieg ogres to work, he became aware of the Black Arrows and the danger they presented with their scouting efforts. For this reason, he partnered with Lucretia and assaulted the fortress, capturing the commander of the order and slaughtering the rangers. All of this was done under complete secrecy. Following up on the loss of communication with the fort, the Sandpoint heroes made their way to the fort, discovering that it was overrun by ogres. Confronting a local ogrekin tribe, they freed the few surviving members of the Black Arrows, discovering that even a member of their ranks had been marked by Lucretia's tattoo. Galvanized, the heroes worked with the Black Arrows to retake Fort Rannoch, discovering none other than Lucretia herself hidden within the fortress's bowels. The heroes confronted Lucretia and defeated her, driving the ogres from Fort Rannoch. Unfortunately, Lucretia refused to turn over any useful information, kept in check by the fear of her mysterious master. Almost immediately after the liberation of Fort Rannoch, the immense Skull's Crossing Dam became damaged, and a wave of water came crashing down upon Turtleback Ferry, nearly washing the town away and unleashing a legendary monster called the Black Maga into the waterways of Lower Varissia. Investigating the source of this damage, the heroes discovered that ogres, following Lucretia's command, were seeking to damage the dam and wipe Turtleback Ferry off the map. This would have succeeded in sacrificing the inhabitants of the town who had been marked with the 7-pointed tattoo, further empowering the Sihedron ritual to release Karzug. Only after defeating the ogres did the heroes gain access to the dam's internal structure, allowing them to drain the Storval Deep in a controlled manner, saving whole swaths of Lower Varissia from a cataclysmic doom. Now thoroughly convinced of the nefariousness of the mysterious goings-on around Varissia, the Sandpoint heroes followed up on one last lead. Tracing the ogres on the dam back to their lair, the heroes made their way to the top of Hook Mountain. There, they discovered the domain of Barl Breakbones, a stone giant chieftain gathering his forces for some unknown purpose. Within, the heroes discovered a coven of Annis hags, who had been using their magic to control the weather and induce the intense rains which had overfilled the Storval Deep. They also discovered the corpse of an enormous giant, something which they would later be able to identify as a rune giant from 10,000 years prior. Confronting Barl, the heroes soon defeated the warlord, but made a horrifying discovery. Barl had already unleashed his stone giant warriors. Their target? A sleepy coastal town to the west. Sandpoint. Book 4. Fortress of the Stone Giants. The heroes rushed back to Sandpoint to take part in the defense of the town. They knew from their investigation of Barl's lair that the town was targeted because of the presence of the Old Light, though for the moment the specifics were largely immaterial. Arriving in Sandpoint, the heroes were confronted by a small army of stone giants, immense bears, and even a young red dragon. After a hard-fought battle, the heroes repelled the invaders and discovered the reason for their invasion. The giants were seeking a stone from the Old Light, the former Hellstorm flume which was constructed in the ancient days of Thassilon. The giants sought to bring this stone back to their true liege, the tyrannical giant Mokmurian, to whom Barl Breakbones had been sworn. Mokmurian intended to use ancient spells to speak to the stone and learn the secrets it had seen since the construction of the Hellstorm flume. The secret Mokmurian was seeking turned out to be the location of Zaliasa, a Thassilonian spy in the employ of Karzug, but the heroes wouldn't discover that fact for some time. Determined to put a stop to Mokmurian's plans, and motivated by the simple fact that he might attack Sandpoint again at any moment, the Sandpoint heroes journeyed on to the Storval Plateau by way of the Storval Stairs, then made their way to the ancient fortress of Jorgenfist in the Valley of the Black Tower. Jorgenfist was an ancient fortress of giant kind, built upon the ruins of the Thracic monastery in long-lost Shalast. Once there, the heroes witnessed the army which Mokmurian had assembled. Hundreds of giants and giantkin of many different species and subspecies had gathered to his banner. Evading the worst of the gathered dangers, the heroes made their way into the fortress of Jorgenfist and descended into its depths. Within, the heroes made a number of important and shocking discoveries. First, they made an alliance with Kona the Wise, a stone giant elder who explained to them the origins of Mokmurian. They also discovered a pair of Lamia priestesses who were indoctrinating giants into Mokmurian's service. They even found a deep pit in the ground, the floor of which was littered with corpses which had been sacrificed to the Sihedron ritual. Most importantly, the heroes discovered something truly extraordinary: the Thracic Library, a repository of ancient lore and knowledge tended by a diligent and fully functional clockwork librarian. This library was the single greatest source of Thassilonian lore ever discovered, and would go on to help the heroes in their future endeavors. Finally, the Sandpoint heroes challenged Mokmurian and defeated him, ending the unifying force which brought the giant tribes together, and sowing discord among the tribes as a result. As Mokmurian died, however, the true scale of the challenge facing the heroes was revealed. As the stone giant drew his last breath, he became possessed by the consciousness of Karzug, who threatened the heroes and promised them a terrible end for having delayed his plans. With Mokmurian defeated, the heroes returned to Kona the Wise, who was able to perform the stone-talking ritual for the Old Light Stone, revealing the knowledge which the stone giant tyrant sought. This, coupled with a map which the heroes found among Mokmurian's treasure, pointed toward someone named Zaliasa, a mysterious traitor who bore a key to something called the Rune Forge. Book 5. The Sins of the Saviors. Returning to Sandpoint, the heroes made a surprising discovery. A sinkhole had appeared in the town without warning, and the Town Watch officers who'd gone in to investigate had failed to return. While this might seem like an odd coincidence in the narrative, there's actually a good reason for this event. The sinkhole formed when another surge of power erupted from the Lesser Runewell of Wrath in the Catacombs of Wrath, the one which the heroes had found back in Book 1. This surge was the result of increasing activity on the Runewell network, due to Karzug's own increasing activity in the Eye of Avarice and the assembly of his armies. The Sandpoint heroes, of course, didn't know this. All they knew was that their beloved town was once again in danger. The heroes descended deeper into the Catacombs of Wrath, entering through the sinkhole and exploring passages and chambers which had previously been inaccessible. This put them in the realm of the Scribbler, an ancient being racked with madness, which had been trapped underground since Earthfall. The Scribbler had passed its time by scribing its ravings on the walls, hence the moniker. After the confrontation, the heroes discovered the truth. The scribbler was none other than Zaliasa, an officer under Runelord Elasnist who had commanded the Hellstorm Flume above, but who had secretly been a spy for Karzug. What was most critical for the heroes, however, was the information he possessed. Before Earthfall, Zaliasa had feared the discovery of his treachery, and had planned to hide out in the Rune Forge, where he would be beyond the reach of any of the Runelords. He knew how to access the magical back door to the demiplane. The Rune Forge, the PCs now understood, was a place of tremendous magical power, and was the only place they might find magical weapons capable of defeating the imminent threat of Karzug. In defeating the Scribbler, the heroes discovered the secrets necessary to locate the Rune Forge. So they set out again, traveling north to the shores of Lake Stormunder, into the land of the Lenorm Kings. They followed Zaliasa's clues, then entered the Rune Forge. The heroes were the first outsiders to enter the Rune Forge in 10 millennia, and the world they found within was one out of time, in more ways than one. While the Rune Forge would suppress the need for food, water, or sleep among its inhabitants, it did nothing to inherently forestall the passage of time, meaning the denizens of the demiplane would face their own slow, painful demise given time. Entering the Rune Forge, the PCs bore witness to the remains of the Rune Forge's enclosed ecosystem. While much of the magic within the site remained fully functional, the operators were far less well preserved. Those few who remained active were largely shadows of their former selves. Liches, flesh-warped clones, and metal-infused living statues incapable of forming new memories, to name a few. Facing down these horrors, the Sandpoint heroes began the long process of gathering the items necessary to empower their weapons to be able to defeat Karzug. Their goal was simple: to create rune-forged weapons by infusing their own tools with the sin energies opposed to Karzug's greed magic. After days of hard work, the heroes gathered artifacts of pride and lust, infused with illusion and enchantment magic respectively, and used the Rune Forge pool at the center of the complex to transfer these sin energies into their own weapons. Before they could escape, though, they were confronted by Karzug, who possessed one of the immense statues in the Rune Forge's antechamber to attack the heroes. They succeeded in defeating this statue and escaping the Rune Forge with their empowered weapons intact, but in doing so attracted the full attention of Karzug. The Runelord of Greed was done underestimating these upstart adventurers. Book 6: The Spires of Xin-Shalast. Armed with rune-forged weapons, and the drive to halt Karzug's return, the Sandpoint heroes pieced together the means by which they might travel to the legendary lost city of Xin-Shalast. They set out once more into the heights of the Kodor Mountains, following a whisper of a clue, a mysterious tale of two dwarf brothers who claimed to have stumbled upon the legendary lost city of gold many years before. These brothers were dead and gone, having long ago succumbed to the nightmarish horrors of the Kodor Mountains. But in laying them to rest, the heroes discovered the path forward. Making their way north, the Sandpoint heroes eventually came upon a frozen swamp called the Fen of the Ice Mists. Here, after helping the Fey Guardian of the Swamps, the heroes discovered the path to Xin-Shalast, a metaphysical road at the headwaters of the mythical River Ava, which appears only during the full moon and passes very near to the border of Leng and the Dimension of Dreams. After waiting for the proper moon phase, the heroes made their way between dimensions, and finally emerged on the golden road overlooking the valley of Xin-Shalast, beholding the lost city which hadn't been seen by outsiders in 10,000 years. The city was far from empty, however, as Karzug's agents had been hard at work. Armies of giants had been gathered and enslaved by the rune giants which Karzug had woken from stasis. The Lamias, under the Most High Sioptra, had been hard at work feeding the soul lens, and Kalib, the apprentice of Karzug, had won over the loyalty of a large tribe of Yetis. Making their way through the immense city, the heroes faced many challenges, and defeated even more of Karzug's agents, including a blue dragon and multiple scarlet walkers from the nightmare realm of Leng. They eventually reached the pinnacle of Avarice, the fortress atop Mar Massif, which served as Karzug's seat of power. The heroes entered the fortress, but not before bargaining with the infamous Leng Spiders to put a stop to whatever the mysterious denizens of Leng were up to in the fortress. Inside the fortress, the heroes confronted a group of denizens who were building some strange device of unknown form and function. As instructed by Karzug, this device was intended to function as a portal through time, bringing his mighty armies from before Earthfall forward into the Age of Lost Omens. The denizens of Leng had no intention of fulfilling their deal with the Runelord, however, and sought to use the device to their own nefarious ends. They desired to reach even further back in time and pull the eldritch god Mar, prior to his entrapment beneath Golarian's crust, into the present. This would almost certainly have devastated life on Golarian's surface, and would have put a stop to even Karzug's plans. Regardless of this double-cross, however, the machinations of the denizens of Leng were halted by the actions of the heroes, who succeeded in deactivating the device. Advancing further into the pinnacle of avarice, the heroes finally located the Anima Focus, the anchor which bound Karzug's runewell and his private demiplane to the material plane. They defeated its guardian, the Most High Sioptra, and brought many of Karzug's elite warriors to ruin. The heroes then used the Anima Focus to enter the Eye of Avarice, the demiplane of greed, where they at long last confronted Karzug the Taker, Runelord of Greed. After a long and perilous journey, it all came down to this one contest. After a grueling fight, which in my case ended with a maximized disintegrate spell via spell strike, Karzug, the Lord of Xin-Shalast, the Master of Transmutation, and the final Runelord of Greed, was defeated. His soul sent to the River of Souls to await judgment. The heroes proceeded to clean up the remaining threats in Xin-Shalast, but with Karzug gone, the greatest danger Varisia had seen in 10,000 years was defeated. And that is what happened in Rise of the Runelords. But the activity of the Runelords in the Age of Lost Omens was far from over. Stay tuned to this channel for the next chapters in the saga of the Runelords. I'll be covering the events of Shattered Star and Return of the Runelords, but also the events of a few other major storylines in the history of the Age of Lost Omens over the next few weeks, all to get you up to speed on the story of Thassilon. If this story sounds fun to you, I encourage you to check out the Rise of the Runelords adventure path, and especially the hardcover Anniversary Edition. It's a really fun campaign, and a foundational piece of Pathfinder's history. I look forward to continuing this story over the next few videos. Thanks for watching, and I wish you a very merry Sinmas.